All right, today we're going to be changing a Rinnai heat exchanger, and I thought this was a good way to start this video to remind people that sometimes things just don't go right, and you run the risk of killing everybody inside when they don't. So bear that in mind for the remainder of the video. So I'm going to start by taking the cover off of this Rinnai. I was not the one who diagnosed this. I did not check any of this stuff before doing the job, and I didn't know anything about it when I came in. I just had a heat exchanger, and I was told that I had to change it. So the first thing I did was I pulled the cover. I pulled the screws off of the control. I'm going to leave the control hanging there. I put all of those screws back where they were. Since they don't actually hold anything on, I just leave them there so I know where they're at. I pulled the igniter and the flame rods out. I'm going to take these two screws. These connect to the gas valve. They're a little bit different, so I'm going to put them in a different spot. I got another guy. He's kind of filing away these screws just so we know which ones came out of where. The first thing that's going to come off is this plate. It's kind of shaped like the United States with a really big Florida. We have 4 plugs in the back of it. And there was a spark generator attached to the igniter. I'm going to let that hang. Next, I'm going to take this face plate off of here. Throughout the course of this, you're going to see some screws with wires hanging onto them. They just hold on to wires. They're kind of the equivalent of zip ties in this installation. I have a couple of clips that attach to a wire. That wire actually runs behind the heat exchanger. You're going to see what I do with that towards the end. This is important. You're going to need a long extension with a magnetic bit to get the burner out. The screws are all the way in the back. You got to go through these front holes and pull them out of there. Now, once you do that, the whole burner can come out. It's not going to come out super easy. It kind of gets a little bit stuck in there. You got to shake it around and move it. Set that to the side. You're going to want to clean that up a little bit before you put it back in. Now, this comes with instructions, and the instructions are kind of a little bit confusing. I'm sort of doing this my own way since I've done it before. But next, we're going to pull the fan motor out of the housing. So you got to unplug it. It's going to be one plug, and there's 4 screws. 3 of them are in holes, and one of them is in like a notch, and it's got another one of those wire or zip tie type deals on it too. Now, in this part, I think that the instructions will tell you to take the fan motor housing out. I take the entire heat exchanger with the fan motor housing, basically everything all at the same time because it's easier to get it apart once it's on the floor. So in order to disconnect the heat exchanger from the unit, you're also going to have to take 4 screws out of the top portion of the flue. Those are different screws, so be sure to keep them separate. In this part, you're going to get to see the back of my sweatshirt because they're pretty hard to get to. And these concentric vents, they don't really come apart super easy, so be aware of that. It may not just come right out. Next, we're going to disconnect everything that we can see that's attached to the heat exchanger. We have this hose here, so that's just going to get pulled off. I have to disconnect 2 sensors. So there's one on the right-hand side. That one just clamps onto the pipe. The other one actually goes inside of the pipe. So you're going to want to make sure that you drain the water down before actually pulling that out. Probably the best thing to do would have been to just drain the water in the first place. But I like to do things sort of ass backwards. If you follow the directions, you might be better off. But following my video makes it a little bit easier to understand. They're going to send you a packet full of black and white pictures that you can't really tell what anything is. And seeing me do it makes it a little bit more clear. Next, I'm disconnecting the water lines. In this case, we have 3 of them. If you just look at the new heat exchanger, you'll know how many you got to look for back there. All the water lines on here are just pushed in with O-rings, so they have clips on them. So one of them has 2 screws and a clip that flips over. One of them is just a clip that goes right over the top. And then the other one is 1 screw and another, thing that just flips over. Now I'm taking the heat exchanger out. You'll be able to see in the back of the cabinet that there's brackets. So there's 2 on top and then there's 2 on the bottom. In this case, there's like a plate on the back of the heat exchanger with a metal portion that allows the fresh air to come into the fan. So I'm just going to pull that out, and then anything that I forgot to unplug, I'm just going to unplug it right then and there. The plugs are pretty easy to figure out how to get back together because they're all color-coded. They're pretty much all different, and they have little red marks on them to, line up the connection. So now that I've got the unit out, I'm going to take the fan motor housing off of this one. The screws are in the side. That's why it's easier to take out when the thing is off. And the wire harness with the sensors, I'm just going to check the orientation of everything, and then I'm going to pull it off. I have to get it actually around the unit because it's just one piece running all the way around. Now I'm changing this gasket. I don't know why I changed this gasket. It seemed like it was in pretty good shape. This unit's only a couple years old. But they sent me one, and then after I changed it, I decided that any gaskets that looked like they were in good shape, I was just going to leave them from now on. But either way, this is how I'm doing it. I got one flat one, and then I have one with some notches cut out of it, and that goes and flips around the screw holes. And like I said, this is the plate, goes in the back of the heat exchanger, and when the fan blows, basically it's sucking the fresh air from there. This piece has 6 screws on top, and then actually I didn't realize that the new heat exchanger didn't have the bottom clip, so I had to take them off of the other one and put it on there so that I can resecure the heat exchanger at the end, and actually resecure this plate too, because the plate's going to stick to that. Again, you're going to want to try and bear in mind what screws you're using for what. You want to try to keep track of them. I had a piece of paper, and Josh, who was not particularly helpful because we did wind up putting some wrong screws in the wrong places by the end of it all. But we're human beings. It's just, this happens. But we're going to put that wire harness back on. We're going to put all our sensors back on. This one comes with a little O-ring. Like I said, it goes inside of the pipe, and then it's got a little plate with 2 screws that go in there. That is a water sealing element, so, don't forget the O-ring. Once that's on there, I have some temperature sensors and things that I have to put on. Like I said, bear in mind the orientation of this stuff when you're putting it on, because this one I kind of forgot where it was, and then I actually took a picture, and I looked back at the picture to see where it was. It was actually clipped down on the bottom of the pipes here. If you put the clips on, you can actually just slide this one back in place after the fact. But it's better to do things before you forget them. Simply put, if you start putting this job in the wrong order, you're going to wind up screwing yourself, because you're going to put something in, and then you're going to put the whole thing together, and then you're not going to be able to get it in the right spot. So if you can do things early, do them early before you put the heat exchanger back on. So like I said, we have 6 screws on the top of this plate, and then there's 2 that are going to go down on the bottom. This part is going to line up exactly, so don't try to screw around with the orientation. Now after that, I'm going to put the fan motor housing back on. Don't go and put the fan motor back in yet. Just leave that open for the time being. That's one of the things that I wound up doing too early. Once I got the thing back in, I put the fan motor in, and at the end of it all, I dropped one of the burner screws into the fan. So I had to pull the fan motor back out. It's just a waste of time, and it's aggravation, and the last thing you need on a job like this is aggravation, because it's stressful. Once I've got that all together, I'm going to put the heat exchanger back in. You want to make sure that your flue lines up right. I have 4 screws in the top brackets and then 3 in the bottom. At this point, I'm going to reconnect my water lines. If you get a little bit of silicone lubricant, it's going to make them go in really easy. If you don't have that, it's going to be a huge pain in the ass. So bear in mind, a little bit of lubricant goes a long way. I'm going to put the clips back on. Remember, basically the clips have little hooks on them, so they go over the top of the brass valve body, and then when you screw it in, it holds the pipe in there tight. And then one of the clips that's on this one is just a clip, slides over. You'll see the direction. It's only going to go one way in there. This is where I put the fan motor back. Again, that probably wasn't the right thing, because once I put the burner in, I dropped the screw. You're going to see that in a minute. So again, nobody's perfect. Just remember, try to keep the fan motor out as long as possible. You're not going to be able to keep it out before you put the front plate back on, but you should keep it out at least until you get the burner in there. So I started putting some of the plugs back together. Like I said, they're color-coded, so we got green ones, we got white ones. This blue one did fit the white one, but then I figured out it was the wrong one. It's just going to be the nature of the game. There's going to be extra plugs, so don't worry about the extra plugs. It's not really relevant to what we're doing here. You have options of like other controls and things that can go on there, and that's what they include those extra plugs for. So if you have plugs that are not plugged in, don't go start looking around for things to plug them into, unless you have any of those cool accessories. So there was one part that I forgot about. It was the port where that rubber tube was installed on. I forgot to put it on the new heat exchanger. I used a right angle drill to fit that on there. If you're DIYing this, which they don't recommend, you may not have one of those. Next, I'm going to go ahead and put the burner back in. It should fit right inside of there, and then it's going to be 2 screws. And don't forget, you got to have a magnetic tip on either an extension or a long screwdriver to get that in there. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do the job. And like I said, I dropped one of the screws inside of the fan, and I had to go back in there, fish it out. That was the purpose of not putting the fan motor back right away. But at least it does go back easy. 4 screws, and we're back in business. At this point, I'm just, checking the orientation of things, make sure I know where everything was when I took it out. There was 2 screws already installed on the top of this plate for whatever reason, so I took them out and put them back in. If you wind up with extra screws on this, it's probably not that big a deal. I'm not going to put every screw in on this plate just yet, because part of it is actually going to get screwed into the next plate that goes over the top. So for my purposes, I'm just going to put the top 4, and then I'm going to put the clips back on where that wire harness was. And since they gave it to me with the kit, I'm going to change the gasket on the gas valve. I don't think that you really need to do this. Didn't really look like it was bad. But again, it was just one of those things that was included, and it was easy enough to change. So I figured I'd just put it in there. Now, this gas valve has 2 screws on it. Essentially, what's going to happen is that plate is going to go back on, and the screws are going to tighten up against that gasket. Make sure your plate is in the right orientation when you start putting it on, because I put 1 screw in, and then I had to pull it out because it didn't seem like it was in the right spot. And I think I was right about that. And from here, you're just going to repeat the steps, taking it apart backwards. You're just going to put all the screws back. You're going to put all the wires back where they came from. Like I said, there's a couple of wires with screws that are just hanging off. Those are just to hold the wires. If you can get them back in the same sort of orientation, you're pretty much in good shape. I wound up using zip screws on here because Josh gave me the wrong screws for the fan. So, again, that wasn't really a big deal in this case because this is just the flue piping. Just make sure whatever screws you use to put that in, they're short. Last thing you want to do is do all this work and then put a hole in your new heat exchanger. Now I'm going to turn the water on in the unit, just basically make sure that I don't have any leaks on anything. I did have a leak on my filter on the bottom. That had nothing to do with me. I don't know what that was all about. But ultimately, I just pulled it out and put it back in. Now we have a red and yellow wire. There's a lot of stuff labeled on here that, you're going to be able to see. So you're going to have the red and yellow wire. It's going to say red on the front plate, red and yellow. And then the igniter is just the different connection. You want to make sure that all your plugs are in the right place. I take the wires where they were, and I tie up all the loose ends hanging out. I went ahead and put my igniter box right there on the right-hand side, and then I'm going to put the control back on. Remember that I actually left that screw in there, so that's one of the different screws that I was talking about. Don't lose that. Anyway, once I got the whole thing together, I could get the cover back on. I checked for gas leaks first, and naturally, when I went to go run the hot water, it didn't work. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. But it didn't take long to diagnose that we needed a spark generator on there, ignition coil, whatever you want to call it. Possibly that could have been a casualty of the leaking heat exchanger. Or maybe not. Like I said, I didn't diagnose it. I don't know. But anyway, hope this helps.